America's #1 show on pop culture and politics. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth. And part of what has allowed this nation to remain great has been the dedication and the sacrifice of those who serve this country in uniform. Members of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, people who have sacrificed their lives for our country, and we recall them on Memorial Day. But what is the lesson about Memorial Day concerning the future and the present of warfare for the United States of America? 1-800-955-1776 is our phone number. It's one of those things that when you talk to people about our military right now, there was even a piece in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend about a veteran of the Iraq War who said, wait a minute, I came home from this war having served my country, and people treat me now like I'm damaged somehow, that I'm damaged goods, that there's something wrong with me. It's something that I've written about before regarding people who served our country in Vietnam. The truth about Vietnam vets is very few of them are homeless, very few of them committed suicide, very few of them are down and out. As a matter of fact, every study that has ever been done by the Veterans Administration or anyone else about Vietnam vets has shown that they overperform. They are less likely to have committed suicide or to have psychiatric problems or to be drug addicted or to have broken lives. Less likely than people in that same cohort, that same period of time, who didn't serve. So this idea somehow that service in the military, of course it is sacrificial. You don't make money that way. It's not a way that you advance your bottom line, if you measure your bottom line in terms of money. It is a way you serve your country and you dedicate yourself to a higher good. But people question our recent wars and say, you know what? Somehow in the United States, we had all of this sacrifice and all of this service for wars that were worthwhile and that were important and that unified the country. But more recently, we've had wars that are, number one, undeclared and therefore unconstitutional. And number two, we've had wars that are unpopular, that divide the country, that don't bring it together. And this is supposed to be a huge departure in American history. We've never had this before. I can't tell you how many people said to me, called up the show, and said, you know what? This war in Iraq is the first time we have ever gone to war against another country that didn't attack the United States. We've never gone to war before. Okay, I want to deal with that this hour because it is Memorial Day, and it's very, very important for people to remember all of the sacrifices made in all of the undeclared wars and with all of the controversial and, in fact, unpopular wars that we fought in the history of this country. 1-800-955-1776 is our phone number. I recall this in part because there's actually a very good column, Memorial Day column, by E.J. Dionne of the Washington Post. And he talks about this idea. Reading the history of the period leading up to the Civil War is jarring, because its political conflicts bear eerie similarities to our own. For the sharp regional differences over how the federal government's power should be regarded, for the way in which advocates of slavery relied on, quote, constitutional, unquote, claims to justify its survival and spread, for the refusal of pro-slavery forces to accept the need for compromise in the wake of the outcome of the 1860 election, and for the fierce disagreements over how the very words morality, patriotism, and freedom should be defined. Okay, what E.J. Dionne, as a big liberal, is trying to do is to make it sound as if people on the Tea Party side of things, people who question the Obama administration, are the equivalent of the Confederate side in the Civil War. By the way, I begin with a basic idea here, and if somebody wants to call and disagree, you can call and disagree. Almost everyone, including people who feel great sympathy and even the appeal of the what was used to be called the Lost Cause or the Gallant Lost Cause, the cause of the Confederacy. Can we agree, please, that the Confederacy was wrong in the Civil War? I mean, because if we don't agree on that the Confederacy was wrong, it was not a good idea to break up the United States of America and to cost 750,000 dead bodies because Abraham Lincoln wanted to stop the spread of slavery, which is all that the Republican Party was committed to. Lincoln explicitly, he was ready to accept a constitutional amendment that would have protected slavery from interference in the states in which it already existed. There were some Southern advocates of what was called unionism at the time. People had been involved with the old Union Party, which ran John Bell of Tennessee for president in 1860. And Lincoln said, yes, the Republicans supported it. They were willing to pass the constitutional amendment if it had avoided war. In fact, it did pass the House, that constitutional amendment, protecting slavery. This war did not start because Abraham Lincoln was determined to invade the South and free the slaves. Maybe it would have been better if it had. But that wasn't Lincoln. Lincoln wanted to preserve the Union. He said in a famous letter that if I could preserve the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would. If I could preserve the Union by leaving all the current slaves in slavery, I would. If I could preserve the Union by freeing some of the slaves and leaving others as they are, I would do that. But my only goal is to preserve the Union. This was a war that we honor today, because until World War I, this day, Memorial Day, was called Decoration Day. And it was set up basically to honor the dead who fell in the Civil War. Far more people than died in any of our other wars. In fact, more people died in the Civil War still today in 2014. If you total the 750,000 people that they now say died in the Civil War on both sides, that is more than all the other people who died in World War II, Vietnam, Korea, World War I, Spanish America, all the other wars put together. The carnage was unbelievable. If you take it with today's population, imagine today if, God forbid, 1,000 times we lost 7 million Americans. 7 million young men. And another 500,000 who came back missing legs and missing arms, because at the time, with medicine where it was, basically the only hope you had for treating wounded people was to cut off part of them. It's an unimaginable thing. And by the way, this is something I just learned, and one of the great things, and I do love it. It's why I do spend whatever time I have available reading and writing about history, because even though I've been doing it for a lifetime, I learn new stuff all the time. I just learned why it is that we celebrate Memorial Day in May. Why in May? It used to be set on May 30th. And then it became, when they moved everything to allow people to have 3-day weekends, it's the last Monday in May. Why then? The holiday was officially set up by General John Logan, who was a Union war hero, a Union general, and also a politician. He was the Republican nominee for vice president in 1884, in one of the closest elections in American history. He was almost vice president of the United States. But more importantly, for our purposes, he was the leader, the commander-in-chief of what was called the Grand Army of the Republic. The Grand Army of the Republic was an organization for Union war veterans, and they determined in 1868, 3 years after the end of the war, looking out across the country, my God, there are graveyards, cemeteries everywhere where there are Union dead and there are Confederate dead. Let's have a day, Decoration Day, and that's what they called it, where we go out to the graves of the fallen and we bring flowers. That's why it's in May. Because May is the time when flowers are available. And by the way, there's a very moving piece of music called Decoration Day by Charles Ives, great American composer, where he describes it. And literally, they would go up. That would be the highlight. You'd have a picnic, you'd have a parade, and then a parade with women carrying bundles of flowers to put on the graves of the fallen that were everywhere in our country. Was the Civil War uncontroversial? No, the Civil War was deeply controversial. Was it declared? What do you think? When we come back, we'll give you answers and talk about the American tradition of making war this Memorial Day. What's right about it? More with your calls coming up.
1-800-955-1776. The Michael Medved Show. That's 1-800-955-1776. The Michael Medved Show. All across America.
It's an honor to talk to you because I think you got the best talk show in the United States.
Thank you. I agree.
This is the Michael Medved Show.
21 minutes after the hour on the Michael Medved Show. It is Memorial Day, and a great day to enrich your background in terms of American history. And you know what? In terms of the history of Western civilization, Hillsdale College is offering a course on the great books. It is free. It is available right now. You're getting in on the ground floor at the very beginning. It's 11 sessions free online with some of the best minds in the country, learning about some of the greatest books that have influenced and shaped the people that we are and the civilization in which we live. Starting with the Iliad, the Bible, actually several books of the Bible, the works of Geoffrey Chaucer, Thomas Aquinas, and more. Check it out. It's a free course on great books from Hillsdale College. Go to medvedforhillsdale.com. That's medvedforhillsdale.com. Talking about the belief that somehow we have this history of noble warfare in America, but somehow recent wars in Iraq, recent wars in Afghanistan, recent wars in Vietnam, even Korea, don't fall into that category. And usually people say there are two reasons why they don't. Number one, because the wars weren't declared. The last time the United States declared war, does anybody know out there? Let's take a show of hands. Anybody know the last country on which the United States declared war? What did you say? 19? No. The last time the Americas declared war was we declared war on Bulgaria. I'm not kidding. We did in 1943. In the middle of World War II. That was also one of the very few unanimous declarations of war. I mean, it's hard to believe. There were people who voted against most of our declarations of war. Some of them were very close. But since World War II, we have not declared war on anybody. And, oh yeah, the most costly war in our history, the Civil War, was not a declared war. Why was it not a declared war? Why did Lincoln not get a declaration of war? He probably could have gotten one. But he only could have gotten one, and that was part of what concerned him, because the South had pulled out. If you took the anti-war Northern Democrats and you put them together with the Southern Democrats and Whigs, old Whigs, who had left the Congress of the United States, it's not at all clear that Lincoln could have gotten a declaration of war. Probably he could, with the war having started. But the idea was that the South was not another country. The whole purpose of the war was to fight an insurrection, to fight what was called the Great Rebellion. And that's why the North has always called it the Civil War, not the war between the states. We never declared war on Virginia. We never declared war on Georgia. We certainly treated Georgia like we had declared war on Georgia. But that war was undeclared. And by the way, every American president, including two of the founders, no, strike that, three of the founders, fought an undeclared war. Which founders am I talking about? John Adams fought a naval war against France that lasted 2 years, that claimed over 100 American lives. It was a very serious war. It was involved, America was involved, allied with the Netherlands and Britain. And our ships, our entire Navy was committed to this effort, all 22 ships in the U.S. Navy at the time. We fought the war, was never declared. John Adams, founding father. Thomas Jefferson, founding father, sent the American Navy and Marines to the shores of Tripoli in 1805, no declaration of war. And then 5 years later, James Madison came back and did the same thing, the father of the Constitution. Here's something else, and I just found this out reading Lynn Cheney's excellent new biography of James Madison. Lynn Cheney's going to be joining us on the show to talk about it, the wife of the former vice president. James Madison personally was responsible for changing the language of the Constitution at the Constitutional Convention. Originally, in Article 1, Section 8, where they were talking about the powers of Congress, it had used the term, Congress shall make war. Madison changed it to declare war. Why? Because he argued it was the president's prerogative and had to be the president's prerogative to make war. To declare war, which means something else legally, that is Congress's prerogative. That's why we've had, by some calculations, over 180 undeclared military actions in which American troops have been in harm's way, authorized by presidents Republican and Democrat and Whig and Federalist and you name it, partially because that's the necessity that our founders saw in phrasing the Constitution the way they did. The president is commander-in-chief. It is his power to make war. Congress is a legislative body, and for the legalities involved, it is their power to declare war. Let's go to Christian in Simi Valley, California. Christian, you're on the Michael Medved Show on Memorial Day.
Michael, happy Memorial Day, and a big fan of your show. So, anyway,
Thank you.
What I wanted to ask was, with all the stuff that's going on in the world right now, with Ukraine, Iran, North Korea, and maybe even China, do you think that we might be heading to a World War III eventually?
I'm hesitating to answer because my immediate response is God forbid. I don't think it's likely because, but is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. What is happening with China and China's aggressive moves against the Philippines, China's aggressive moves against Vietnam, China's potential aggression against Taiwan, North Korea's potential aggression against Japan or against South Korea, any of that could lead to an international conflagration that would claim hundreds of millions of people. I mean, it is that serious. Do I think that we are likely to come to war in Europe over Ukraine? President Putin, thank God, has given every indication that he's going to respect this new Ukrainian election that took place over the weekend. The right guy won the Ukrainian election, Poroshenko, for the new presidency of the Ukraine. And look, it's one of those things. I remember my late father, who was the smartest guy I ever knew. And I was a little kid at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962. And we were all glued because my father, working in the defense industry at the time, he was designing guidance system for missiles at the time. So he was very, very aware of the nuclear nature of this confrontation. And he had said to me, and I was little. I wasn't. I'd just been bar mitzvahed. I was 13, and I remember him saying to me at the time that the world may not continue as we know it. There was a real expectation of nuclear war. But then we tuned in on the TV, and there was a session of the UN, and Adlai Stevenson was speaking in the UN, and I believe it was Gromyko who was the Soviet ambassador, and Gromyko was speaking at the UN, and they were arguing against each other. And he said, "Michael," my dad said, "may he rest in peace, Michael, look at that on TV. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." I said, "Dad, it's not beautiful. The Russians shouting at Adlai Stevenson. What's beautiful about that? He's shouting in Russian. I can't." He said, "It's beautiful because once they start jawing like that, once they start arguing at the United Nations, they're not going to blow each other up." I hope that's true also in Europe today. 34 minutes after the hour on the Michael Medved Show on Memorial Day, and certainly one of the most important things you can do to honor a day like this, where we honor those who have given so much to our country, is to give something back. Support Concerned Veterans for America. Go to our website, click on the website. It makes a very, very big difference signing up literally hundreds of thousands of people, including non-veterans, who say we're going to stand up to make sure that not that you have the longest waits, but that you have the best medical care and the most prompt service. Because if we can't get our government to keep faith with our vets, then what happens to the rest of us with government taking over medical care? But then we have to do something to stop that too. But meanwhile, go to Concerned Veterans for America, click on their banner. It's at our website at michaelmedved.com. Talking a little bit about E.J. Dionne's piece, where he suggests that some of the same divisions that America faced during the Civil War, America is facing today. He writes, our nation argued over what the founders really intended and over the Supreme Court's authority to impose a particular political point of view. In the case of the Dred Scott decision, it was the pro-slavery view, and to override growing popular opposition to slavery's expansion. Religious people sundered their ties with each other over the political implications of faith and biblical teachings. And yes, we struggled over race and racism. Is this a period like the Civil War with a country coming apart? I would argue that it is not, because the issues that divide us today, though there are big cultural issues, it is hard to imagine people actually wanting to kill each other. And one of the new books about the Civil War, which is called Like a Fever in the Mind, is about how long before the war started, long before John Brown's raid in 1859, there were people who were talking about the need to punish the other side. And this was on both sides, with actual violence and military action. We don't want that in the United States? What we do want is coming together and remembering the way that we have fought together for the good of the world. And back to Christian and Simi Valley, and if answering your question about World War III in Ukraine, no, I don't think so. And I think, frankly, there is simply too much economic interconnection and, frankly, too much progress in most parts of the world to make some kind of global conflict likely. Let's go quickly to John in Idaho Falls, Idaho. You're on the Michael Medved Show on Memorial Day.
Thanks for taking my call, Michael. I agree with you. The Civil War was not about slavery. It was an economic and states' rights war, absolutely. But I disagree with your...
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that for a moment. It was about union. It's not about economics. The Southern apologists say it was about states' rights. It wasn't about states' rights, because it was about the territories, not the states. It was about the territories and the future states, and whether or not the federal government had the right to stop slavery from coming into territories, which would later become states.
Speak, please. Can I speak, please?
You can, but I just don't want you to mischaracterize what I said.
Okay, the northern governors and editors screamed bloody murder about what the economic harm the South being allowed to leave would cause them. It was taught in the military academies at the time that secession was legal. New England states were some of the first ones to ever threaten to secede prior to the Civil War by like 30 years, okay?
No, the Hartford Convention. Okay. I'll let you continue making your case, but then I'm going to answer it because you're giving people a misleading idea. Go ahead.
I'm just saying that some of the original 13 states have it in their constitutions that they can leave if they choose. How is it that we can have this union? You can come in, but you can never leave. It just makes no sense to any of that I can understand with the Founding Fathers. They left England, so they're going to make it illegal for us to leave the Union? No way.
Well, the understanding here, I mean, you are absolutely correct that there is nothing definitive in the Constitution that says you cannot secede. But there is also nothing definitive in the Constitution that says that you can. What you can do is you can amend the Constitution. The one thing that the North was fighting for was not economics. The North was fighting to preserve the United States of America. And as Lincoln said, to show the world that this experiment in democracy could actually work. We'll be right back.
1-800-955-1776. The Michael Medved Show. The Michael Medved Show. 1-800-955-1776. That's 1-800-955-1776. MichaelMedved.com.
44 minutes after the hour on the Michael Medved Show. I very much appreciate John's call from Idaho Falls, Idaho. And let me try to explain why I jumped in so aggressively when he called this Memorial Day. And you can call too, by the way, at 1-800-955-1776. One of the reasons I jumped in so aggressively is because it's a terrible, terrible mistake to think that over 350,000 young men gave their lives for the Union cause and over 300,000 young men for the Confederate cause, nearly, because they were arguing about economic well-being or states' rights. Nobody dies for states' rights. Really, they don't. It's like saying that the 25,000 Americans who gave their lives in the Revolutionary War, and by the way, it's stunning when you think about that, because that's 25,000 out of 3 million. So again, that would be the equivalent today of 2.5 million Americans. Think about that. Revolutionary War. Did they die because the British wanted to put on what was the equivalent of about a penny and a half per dollar in total taxes? You know, in California, they raise taxes that much every month, right? I mean, come on. It seems like it. You're talking about the British are going to raise taxes a minuscule amount. It's less than 2 cents. So 25,000 Americans are going to sacrifice their lives because they don't want to pay 2 cents in taxes? That wasn't it. What they were fighting for in the Revolution was the idea of self-determination, controlling our own affairs. They had their legislatures. Their legislatures made the decisions for them. They were used to being left alone by the British far away in London. And all of a sudden, after the French and Indian War, the British are determined they want to drag some more money out of the colonies. So they're going to supersede the legislatures, not pay any attention to them, not let people vote, not let them control themselves. Their slogan wasn't no taxation. It was no taxation without representation. And by the way, and part of the reason that was such a solid slogan is it would have been kind of impossible at that time because of the transportation to actually have representation, have anyone meaningfully representing the colonies far away in London because there's no communication. It's really tough to do. Now, that brings us to the Civil War again. And yes, today is a day, historically, this is a holiday that's based on the Civil War. It was only after World War I that officially it was changed under President Harding that Memorial Day would cover the fallen in World War I. It would cover the fallen in the Spanish-American War. It would cover the fallen in all of our wars, not just the Civil War. Originally, this was just a holiday for the Civil War. Here's what's important to understand about the Civil War. What motivated the people who fought for the Union was not a desire to go in and invade Georgia and free slaves. Some people may have had that desire, but very few. It was a desire to protect the United States of America. All of a sudden, you had a situation, you're watching in the North, then yes, they are slave owners, and yes, you may not want, the leaders, certainly of the Confederacy were, most of them. You certainly may not want to go and invade them, but you don't like them very much. And they're firing at the American flag, and they're attacking an American fort in Fort Sumter, and taking American soldiers prisoner, and claiming that they are now a separate country, an independent country. What people were fighting for was to protect America from what was, and I think rightly, seen as a very serious threat. Because once again, if you have the principle that any state can secede at any time that it wants, the Union is gone. And Daniel Webster said it very famously in his great reply to Hayne, liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. That's what people in the North believe. So were the people in the South fighting for slavery? No, they weren't fighting for slavery either. What they were fighting for was, all of a sudden, their troops invading your soil. You're a loyal son of Virginia. You're a loyal son of Tennessee. You're a loyal son of South Carolina. And all of a sudden, you are being attacked. And you owe allegiance to the local government that's representing you. It's not a rabble. It's not a mob. It's a local government. And it is simply impossible to understand the passion with which people gave to their causes. In the South, it was the local government, our local loyalty, our local state. In the North, it was fighting for the Union, to preserve the United States, what Lincoln called, rightly, the last best hope of Earth. It's Memorial Day. We will be right back with your calls.
1-800-955-1776. The Michael Medved Show. That's 1-800-955-1776. Now, it's time for Medved on Movies.
Wolverine, played once again by Hugh Jackman, is sent 50 years back into the past in order to stop the terrible war between mutants and Sentinels before it even breaks out in X-Men: Days of Future Past.
Professor? You're gonna find this hard to believe. I was sent here for you. From the future? Tell whoever it was that sent you. It was you.
And James McAvoy is okay as Professor Xavier as a young man, while Michael Fassbender is outstanding as the younger version of Magneto. While they all have to work together to get the cooperation of Mystique, this time played by Jennifer Lawrence, and yes, Richard Nixon, in order to save the world from devastating and unnecessary conflict.
There is a new enemy out there.
It's going to take all of us to end this war.
Everything that happens now is in your hands.
And the time-traveling plot is clever and provocative. The acting is fine, and the special effects imaginative. For people who love the X-Men series, this film will be thrilling, satisfying, and emotionally engaging. But as for me, and I know it's a personal thing, I could probably live out the rest of my entire life without seeing even one more Marvel comic book movie, and I wouldn't regret it. Rated PG-13 for plenty of sci-fi superhero action, but nothing especially racy or disturbing. 3 stars for the skillful and well-crafted X-Men Days of Future Past.
1-800-955-1776. The Michael Medved Show. That's 1-800-955-1776.
It is 55 minutes past the hour on the Michael Medved Show. I mentioned that E.J. Dionne writes a pretty good column, and yes, he comes at things from a liberal point of view, but I think everybody, left, center, and right, can agree with what he said at the end. He said it would be a mistake to ignore the roots of Memorial Day and our Civil War. Memorial Day is a call to political responsibility, even more so in some ways than the 4th of July. The graves that our ancestors decorated were a reminder, remember it used to be called Decoration Day, were a reminder that politics can have dire consequences. Distorting political reality, the pro-secession forces, for example, wrongly insisting that the resolutely moderate Abraham Lincoln was a radical, makes resolving differences impossible. That's important. Distorting political reality makes resolving differences impossible. As we honor our war dead, let us pause to consider how we are discharging our obligations to their legacy. Let's go to Paul, Woodinville, Washington. You're on the Medved Show.
Hello, Michael. This day, our family is remembering Airman William Richardson, my dad's brother, who enlisted in the day after Pearl Harbor, attack on Pearl Harbor. and lost his life on April 29th, 1945, in a routine reconnaissance flight over Germany after Germany had surrendered, leaving my father as the only surviving son. Here's my question for you. My mother is a professor of nursing. She started her nurses training in 1947, her basic nurses training. She's 85, and what she does for volunteer work is she makes alters garments, shorts, jeans, sweatshirts, sweats, stuff like that, for the wounded soldiers that have come back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And they do different sorts of cutting because the types of wounds that these soldiers have they're so painful they can't wear regularly stitched clothing. They have to be altered with Velcro here and there so that they can get into their wounds and so on. It's very painful for them. Mom does she says she tries to get 10 or 12 of these things done a month. But she told me that the regional director of this program, for which she works with, which is called So Much Comfort, told her that they have 100,000 back orders. And you know what? I have to say this. I asked her this. Why in the heck, Mom, is this not been the Department of Defense brought this to a commercial? Why do we have 85-year-old ladies making these things on their spare time, and we have 100,000 back orders for our soldiers? This is not the VA's problem.
That is completely a reasonable inquiry and very appropriate. Paul, honestly, I would suggest that you bring this to the attention of CVA, Concerned Veterans for America. It's a great organization. They exist to help deal with things like this and to protect our veterans in this greatest nation on God's green earth.